The phone call came at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, and I knew immediately that everything I thought I understood about my life was about to change forever. "Jake, you need to hear this," my neighbor Pete whispered into the receiver. "I'm standing outside the Riverside Motel on Highway 9. Your wife's car is in the parking lot." My stomach dropped like a stone thrown into deep water. I sat up in bed, the empty space beside me suddenly making perfect sense. The cold sheets, the missing pillow impression, the silence that had felt peaceful just moments before now screamed with accusation. "Are you certain it's her car?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. That silver Honda Accord with the small dent on the passenger door from when she'd backed into our mailbox last spring. There couldn't be two cars exactly like that in our small town of Millbrook. "License plate matches," Pete confirmed. "Jake, I'm sorry, man. I was driving back from my shift at the plant when I spotted it. Room 237 has the lights on." I thanked Pete and hung up, my hands trembling as I set the phone back on the nightstand. 22 years of marriage, 22 years of what I thought was happiness, trust, and partnership. Jennifer and I had built what I believed was a solid life together. I worked as a senior accountant at Morrison & Associates, she managed the local library, and we'd created a comfortable existence in our 3-bedroom colonial on Maple Street. But apparently, comfort wasn't enough for her. I dressed quickly in jeans and a sweater, my mind racing through the possibilities. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe she was helping a friend in crisis. Maybe Pete had made a mistake about the license plate. Even as these thoughts crossed my mind, I knew I was grasping at straws. The signs had been there for months. The late nights at work, the new clothes, the way she'd started keeping her phone face down during dinner. The drive to the Riverside Motel took 12 minutes that felt like 12 hours. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles ached. The motel sat on the outskirts of town, a run-down establishment that catered to truckers and people who needed privacy for activities they couldn't conduct at home. I parked 3 spaces away from Jennifer's Honda and stared at room 237. The curtains were drawn, but I could see shadows moving behind the thin fabric. My heart hammered against my ribs as I approached the door, each step feeling like I was walking toward the edge of a cliff. I raised my hand to knock, then hesitated. Did I really want to know? Once I opened this door, there would be no going back to the comfortable illusion of my marriage. But the alternative was living a lie, and I'd never been good at pretending. I knocked 3 times, firm and deliberate. "Just a minute," came Jennifer's voice from inside, followed by the sound of hurried movement and whispered conversation. When the door opened, my wife stood there in a hotel bathrobe, her hair disheveled and her face flushed. Behind her, sitting on the edge of the bed in his boxers and undershirt, was her brother-in-law, my sister's husband, David. "Jake," Jennifer stammered, her face going pale. "What are you doing here?" The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Not only was my wife cheating, but she was doing it with David, a man I'd considered a friend for over a decade, a man who sat at our dinner table every Sunday, who'd been the best man at my sister Carol's wedding, who'd borrowed money from me just 6 months ago to help with his mortgage payment. "I think the better question is what you're doing here," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. David had the decency to look ashamed, but Jennifer's expression quickly shifted from shock to defiance. "You followed me," she accused, as if I were the one in the wrong. "I didn't have to follow you. Someone saw your car and thought I should know my wife was spending the night at a motel with another man." "Jake, let me explain," David started to say, but I cut him off with a raised hand. "Don't," I said. "Just don't. There's nothing you can say that will make this better." I looked at Jennifer, this woman I'd loved for more than half my adult life, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. The hurt was there, sharp and overwhelming, but underneath it was something else, a cold, calculating anger that surprised me with its intensity. "How long?" I asked. Jennifer wrapped the bathrobe tighter around herself. Jake, please, can we talk about this at home? How long, Jennifer? She looked at David, then back at me. 8 months. 8 months. While I'd been working extra hours to save for the European vacation she'd been talking about, while I'd been planning our anniversary dinner, while I'd been living in what I thought was a happy marriage, she'd been conducting a secret relationship with my brother-in-law. I want you out of the house by the end of the week, I said quietly. You can't just throw me out, Jennifer protested. It's my house, too. I have rights. Then I'll leave, I replied. But this marriage is over. I turned to walk away, but Jennifer grabbed my arm. Jake, wait. We can work through this. People have problems, but we can fix this. I looked down at her hand on my arm, then met her eyes. Some things can't be fixed, Jennifer. This is one of them. As I walked back to my car, I heard David say something to Jennifer in a low voice, but I didn't look back. I had more important things to think about than whatever excuses they were making to each other. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and racing thoughts. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I'd made several decisions. First, I would contact a lawyer in the morning. Second, I would tell my sister Carol what her husband was doing. Third, I would make sure that David and Jennifer paid for what they'd done to our families. I wasn't sure yet what form that payment would take, but I had time to figure it out. After all, revenge was a dish best served cold, and I was a patient man. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. I needed time to think, to plan, and to start putting the pieces of my new reality together. Jennifer had stayed at the motel, or wherever she'd gone after I left, and the house felt different without her presence. Quieter, but also cleaner somehow, as if her betrayal had been a kind of contamination that was finally being aired out. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad, writing down everything I knew and everything I needed to find out. As an accountant, I'd always been methodical about problem solving, and I approached this situation with the same systematic thinking I used for complex financial audits. First, I needed to understand the full scope of their relationship. 8 months was a long time, long enough for them to have made plans, to have discussed a future together. I needed to know if Jennifer intended to leave me for David, or if this was just a casual affair that had gotten out of hand. Second, I needed to protect my financial interests. Jennifer and I had joint accounts, joint credit cards, and joint ownership of the house. If she wanted to play hardball about the divorce, I needed to be prepared. Third, I needed to decide what to do about David and my sister Carol. Carol deserved to know what her husband was doing, but I also knew that telling her would destroy her marriage and potentially tear apart our extended family. David's parents were good people who'd always treated me well, and they'd be devastated by the scandal. At 9 a.m. I called Harrison & Associates, the best divorce law firm in the county. Margaret Harrison had a reputation for being thorough, aggressive, and discreet. Exactly what I needed. Mr. Patterson, she said when I was finally connected to her office, I understand you need to discuss a domestic relations matter. My wife is having an affair, I said without preamble. I caught them together last night, and I want to file for divorce as soon as possible. I see. Can you come in this afternoon? I have an opening at 2 p.m. I'll be there. After I hung up, I spent an hour gathering financial documents, bank statements, investment accounts, insurance policies, the mortgage paperwork, and our tax returns from the past 5 years. If Margaret Harrison was as good as her reputation suggested, she'd want to see everything. At 11 a.m., I drove to Carol's house. My sister lived in a modest ranch-style home about 10 minutes from downtown, where she and David had been raising their 2 teenage daughters. Carol worked part-time as a substitute teacher, and David was a supervisor at the county highway department. They'd always seemed happy together, which made his betrayal even more incomprehensible. Carol answered the door in her gardening clothes, dirt smudged on her cheek and a surprised smile on her face. "Jake, what brings you by on a Wednesday morning? Shouldn't you be at work?" "I need to talk to you about something important," I said. "Can we sit down?" Her smile faded when she saw my expression. "Of course, come in. Do you want some coffee?" "No, thanks. Carol, what I'm about to tell you is going to be difficult to hear." We sat on her couch, and I watched my sister's face as I explained what had happened the night before. She listened in silence, her expression moving through disbelief, confusion, and finally a kind of hollow acceptance that told me this wasn't completely unexpected news. "I've suspected something," she said quietly when I finished. "David's been different lately. Distant. He started working late more often, and he got a new phone last month. Said his old one was broken, but it seemed fine to me. I'm sorry, Carol. I know this isn't easy to hear." She nodded, staring at her hands. "What are you going to do?" "I'm filing for divorce. I've already contacted a lawyer." "And David?" "That's up to you. But you deserve to know the truth." Carol was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked up at me, and I saw something in her eyes that I recognized. The same cold anger that had been building in me since the previous night. "I want proof," she said. "Before I confront him, I want evidence that he can't deny or explain away." "What kind of proof?" "Pictures, documentation, something concrete." I understood her position. David was a smooth talker who'd been lying to her for 8 months. Without solid evidence, he might be able to convince her that I was mistaken or that there was an innocent explanation for what I'd seen. "I might be able to help with that," I said. "But it would mean following them, watching them." "Are you sure you want to go down that road?" "I'm sure," Carol said firmly. "If my marriage is over, I want to know for certain. And if David thinks he can make a fool of me while carrying on with your wife, he's about to learn otherwise." We spent the next hour planning our surveillance strategy. Carol knew David's schedule better than anyone, and I knew Jennifer's habits. Between the two of us, we could probably figure out when and where they were meeting. "There's something else," Carol said as I was preparing to leave. "David's been talking about taking a vacation. Just the two of us," he said. "A second honeymoon to rekindle our romance. He suggested we go to Myrtle Beach next month." "That's probably when he was planning to end things with Jennifer," I said. "Or maybe he was going to use the trip to confess and ask for forgiveness. Well, he's going to get a different kind of surprise instead." I left Carol's house feeling better than I had since Pete's phone call. Having an ally in this situation, someone who understood the depth of the betrayal, made the whole thing feel more manageable. Carol and I had always been close, and I knew I could count on her to be smart and careful about whatever we decided to do. My appointment with Margaret Harrison went exactly as I'd hoped. She was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 50s who listened to my story without judgment and asked all the right questions. "New York is a no-fault divorce state," she explained, "which means we don't need to prove adultery to get you divorced. However, infidelity can still be relevant when it comes to property division and spousal support, especially if marital assets were used to fund the affair." "What do you mean?" "Hotel rooms, gifts, trips, dinners. If your wife spent marital money on her relationship with this other man, we can argue that she should receive less in the settlement. Do you have access to her credit card statements?" "We have joint accounts. I can get copies of everything." "Good. I also want you to document everything you can about the affair. Dates, times, locations, any witnesses. The more evidence we have, the stronger our position will be." "My sister wants to gather evidence too. Her husband is the other party involved." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Interesting. That complicates things, but it might also work in our favor. If both marriages dissolve because of this affair, it demonstrates a pattern of serious misconduct." She outlined the divorce process, the timeline, and her fees. It was going to be expensive, but I had savings, and I was determined to protect my interests. 22 years of marriage meant Jennifer was entitled to a significant portion of our assets, but I wasn't going to make it easy for her. "One more thing," Margaret said as our meeting concluded. "I strongly advise you to avoid any direct confrontation with your wife or her lover until we've filed the paperwork. Don't do anything that could be construed as threatening or harassing. Document, but don't interfere." Understood. As I drove home, I felt a sense of purpose that had been missing since the previous night. I had a plan now, a strategy for moving forward. Jennifer and David thought they'd been clever, conducting their secret affair while maintaining their public facades. They were about to learn that actions have consequences, and that betraying the people who trust you comes with a price. I spent the evening going through our financial records, looking for evidence of Jennifer's affair spending. What I found was worse than I'd expected. The financial trail of Jennifer's infidelity was like following breadcrumbs through a forest of lies. Over the past 8 months, she'd charged $3,847 to our joint credit card for expenses that made no sense in the context of our marriage. Dinner for two at expensive restaurants on nights when she claimed to be working late. A weekend at a bed and breakfast in the Finger Lakes region when she'd told me she was visiting her college roommate in Syracuse. Lingerie purchases from a boutique I'd never heard of, despite the fact that she'd been wearing the same cotton pajamas to bed for the past 2 years. But the most damning evidence was a charge from 3 weeks ago, $1,200 for a men's watch from a jewelry store downtown. When I'd asked Jennifer about the charge, she'd claimed it was an early birthday present for me and that I shouldn't spoil the surprise by asking questions. My birthday wasn't until December, 4 months away. I photographed every suspicious charge and organized them in a spreadsheet, cross-referencing them with Jennifer's work schedule and the nights she'd come home late. The pattern was clear and damning. My wife had been using our money to finance her affair with my brother-in-law, and she'd been lying to my face about it for months. The next morning, I called Carol to share what I'd discovered. "She bought him a $1,200 watch?" Carol's voice was tight with anger. "David told me his supervisor gave him that watch as a recognition award for his years of service. Do you still have the box or receipt?" He threw the box away, said he didn't need to keep it since it was a gift from work. "But Jake, I remember thinking it was strange because the county doesn't usually give expensive gifts like that. Their usual recognition awards are plaques or gift cards. Can you check if there really was any kind of recognition program at his work?" "I'll call his supervisor directly. Tom Bradley's been David's boss for 6 years. He'll tell me the truth." We arranged to meet that evening to plan our next steps. Carol was going to verify the watch story, and I was going to start tracking Jennifer's current movements to see if the affair was still ongoing. Despite catching them together 2 nights ago, neither Jennifer nor David had contacted me, which suggested they were still seeing each other. I took another personal day and spent the afternoon conducting my own surveillance. At 3 p.m., I parked across the street from the library where Jennifer worked. Her shift ended at 5 p.m., and I wanted to see where she went afterward. At 4:47 p.m., Jennifer emerged from the library with David right behind her. They walked to separate cars but clearly coordinated their departure, leaving within minutes of each other. I followed Jennifer's Honda at a distance, watching as she led me to a small park on the east side of town. David was already there when she arrived, sitting at a picnic table near the playground. I parked behind a maintenance building where I could observe them without being seen and used my phone to take pictures as they talked. Their body language was intimate, Jennifer leaning into David, his hand on her arm, both of them looking around nervously to make sure they weren't being watched. After 20 minutes, they got back in their cars and drove to a small cafe called Murphy's Kitchen. I waited 5 minutes, then went inside and took a seat in a booth where I could see them but remain partially hidden behind a menu. They were sitting close together, sharing a piece of pie and talking in low voices. Jennifer looked happier than I'd seen her in months, laughing at something David said and reaching across the table to touch his hand. Watching them together, I felt a strange detachment, as if I were observing strangers rather than my wife and brother-in-law. I took more pictures with my phone, making sure to capture their faces clearly. Margaret Harrison had been right about documentation. The more evidence I had, the stronger my position would be. At 6:30 p.m., they left the cafe and drove to the Riverside Motel again. I didn't follow them into the parking lot, but I didn't need to. The pattern was clear. They were still actively involved in their affair, still meeting regularly, still using our money to fund their relationship. I met Carol at a diner across town at 8 p.m. She looked tired and angry, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that comes from having your world turned upside down. "I talked to Tom Bradley," she said without preamble. "There was no recognition program, no award, no gift. David lied about the watch." "I'm sorry, Carol." "Don't be sorry. Be helpful. What did you find out today?" I showed her the pictures on my phone, explaining what I'd observed. Carol studied each image carefully, her jaw tightening as she saw her husband's hand on my wife's arm, their intimate posture at the cafe, their obvious comfort with each other. "They look like a real couple," she said quietly. "I think they are, in their minds. This isn't just a casual affair. They're building a relationship." "Then it's time to tear it down." Carol had brought a manila folder with her, which she opened to reveal her own collection of evidence. Phone records showing dozens of calls between David and Jennifer, always during work hours when Carol wouldn't notice. Credit card statements from David's personal account showing charges that matched some of Jennifer's suspicious expenses. They'd been splitting the cost of their dates. A receipt she'd found in David's jacket pocket from a florist, dated the same day Jennifer had come home with flowers that she claimed were from a grateful library patron. "I've been thinking about this all day," Carol said, "and I've decided I don't just want a divorce. I want them to face consequences for what they've done to our families." "What kind of consequences?" "David works for the county. There are ethics rules about conduct that reflects poorly on the department. If his supervisor knew he was having an affair with a married woman, using work time to conduct personal business, lying about his activities, that could affect his job." "And Jennifer works for the library, which is also a public institution." "Exactly. They want to act like teenagers sneaking around behind their spouses' backs? Then maybe they should face some adult consequences." I understood what Carol was suggesting, and part of me was tempted. David and Jennifer had betrayed not just their spouses, but their families, their communities, their professional responsibilities. They'd lied, cheated, and stolen marital resources to fund their relationship. Why shouldn't they face professional consequences for their personal misconduct? But another part of me hesitated. Once we went down that road, there would be no going back. Their affair would become public knowledge, and the scandal would affect not just David and Jennifer, but their co-workers, their friends, and Carol's daughters. "Let me think about it," I said. "Right now, I just want to focus on getting divorced and moving on with my life." "That's fine for you," Carol said, her voice sharp. "But I have 2 teenage daughters who are going to have to live with the consequences of their father's choices. I have to face my friends and neighbors who are going to find out that my husband preferred your wife to me. I have to rebuild my entire life at 43 years old because David decided he wanted something new and exciting." She was right, and I felt selfish for not considering her position more carefully. Carol had more to lose than I did, and fewer resources to start over. If David faced professional consequences for his actions, it might affect his ability to pay child support and alimony, but it would also send a message that adultery wasn't a victimless crime. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked. "I want to document everything we can about their affair. Then I want to present the evidence to their supervisors and let their employers decide whether this kind of behavior is acceptable for public employees. That could backfire. If they both lose their jobs, it might affect our divorce settlements." "I'd rather have less money and more justice," Carol said firmly. We spent another hour discussing the pros and cons of Carol's plan. By the time we parted ways, I'd agreed to help her gather more evidence, but I hadn't committed to the public exposure strategy. I needed to talk to Margaret Harrison first, to understand how such a move might affect my own divorce proceedings. As I drove home, I thought about the man I'd been just 3 days ago, a quiet accountant who trusted his wife, enjoyed family dinners with his sister and brother-in-law, and believed that good people were rewarded for their loyalty and hard work. That man felt like a stranger to me now, replaced by someone harder and more calculating. Jennifer's car wasn't in the driveway when I got home, which meant she was probably still at the motel with David. I wondered if they were making plans for their future together, or if they were just enjoying the thrill of forbidden romance. Either way, they were about to discover that their secret was no longer secret, and that the people they'd betrayed weren't going to quietly disappear. I had work to do. The confrontation came sooner than I'd planned. On Friday evening, Jennifer finally came home while I was in the kitchen preparing dinner. She walked in through the back door as if nothing had changed, as if the past 3 days of her absence were perfectly normal. "Hi, honey," she said, setting her purse on the counter. "Sorry I'm late. I've been staying at my mother's while I think things through." The casual lie was so effortless that I almost admired her skill. Jennifer's mother had been gone for 2 years now, and Jennifer knew I knew that. She was testing me, trying to see if I would call her out or pretend along with her that everything was normal. "How is your mother?" I asked, not looking up from the pasta I was stirring. I thought she might like to hear from me, so I called her house this afternoon. Strangely, no one answered. Jennifer's pause was barely perceptible, but I caught it. "She's been keeping busy. You know how she is." "Actually, I don't know how she is, since she passed away in March of 2021. But maybe you forgot." The kitchen went silent except for the bubbling of the pasta water. Jennifer sat down heavily at the table, the pretense finally abandoned. "Jake, I know you're angry." "Angry?" I turned to face her, and she flinched at whatever she saw in my expression. "Jennifer, I'm way past angry. I'm disappointed. I'm disgusted. I'm wondering how I could have been married to someone for 22 years and not known what kind of person she really was." "You don't understand the situation." "Then explain it to me. Explain how you ended up in a motel room with my sister's husband. Explain the $1,200 you spent on a watch for him while telling me it was my birthday present. Explain the dinners, the weekend trips, the 8 months of lies." Jennifer's face went pale. "You've been spying on me." "I've been protecting myself from someone who's been stealing from our joint accounts to fund an affair. Did you really think I wouldn't notice eventually?" She stood up and began pacing around the kitchen, her hands shaking. "It's not what you think. David and we didn't plan this. It just happened." "Things like this don't just happen, Jennifer. You made choices. You chose to meet him secretly. You chose to lie to me and to Carol. You chose to spend our money on your relationship with him. Every single day for 8 months, you chose to betray your marriage and your family." "I was lonely," she snapped, her composure finally cracking. "You work all the time. You never want to go anywhere or do anything interesting. David pays attention to me. He makes me feel special. So you decided to have an affair instead of talking to me about problems in our marriage. Would you have listened? Really? When was the last time you asked me how I was feeling, or what I wanted, or whether I was happy?" The accusation stung because there was some truth to it. I had been working longer hours lately, and our conversations had become routine and superficial, but that didn't justify what she'd done. "You're right," I said. "I should have been a better husband. I should have paid more attention to you, made more effort to keep our relationship strong. But Jennifer, the appropriate response to marital problems is marriage counseling, not adultery." "I know," she said quietly. "I know it was wrong. But Jake, I think I love him." The words hit me like a physical blow. In all my anger and planning for revenge, I hadn't really considered that Jennifer might actually be in love with David. I'd assumed it was just a midlife crisis, a temporary attraction that would burn itself out. But love changed everything. "Then why are you here?" I asked, If you love him, why aren't you with him? Because I love you too. I know that sounds impossible, but it's true. David makes me feel young and excited. But you're my partner, my best friend. I don't want to lose what we have. You already lost it. The moment you decided to betray me, you lost it. Jennifer started crying then. Not the delicate tears of manipulation, but the ugly, desperate sobs of someone who realizes they've destroyed something precious. I watched her cry and felt nothing but a distant pity. Can we try counseling? She asked through her tears. Can we see if we can fix this? No. Jake, please. I'll end things with David. I'll do whatever you want. I'll quit my job. We can move somewhere else, start fresh. It's too late for that. It's not too late. People work through affairs all the time. We can too, if we both want to. I turned off the stove and faced my wife fully. Jennifer, I've already filed for divorce. The papers will be served to you on Monday. The color drained from her face completely. You filed for divorce? Without even talking to me about it? What was there to talk about? You made your choice when you started your relationship with David. I'm just making mine. But we could work this out. No, we couldn't. Even if I could forgive the affair, I can't forgive the lies. 8 months of looking me in the eye and lying about where you were, what you were doing, who you were with. 8 months of using our money to buy gifts for another man. 8 months of letting me believe we had a good marriage while you were building a relationship with someone else. Jennifer sank back into her chair, the fight going out of her. What about the house? Our savings? Everything we built together? My lawyer will handle the details. You'll get your share, but you won't get more than you're entitled to. And David? What are you going to do about David? That's between David and Carol. But if I were him, I'd be very worried about what my wife is going to do when she finds out about the affair. Jennifer looked up sharply. You told Carol? Of course I told Carol. Did you think I was going to keep your secret? She deserves to know what her husband has been doing. Jake, you don't understand. David's been talking about leaving Carol anyway. Their marriage has been rocky for years. This isn't going to destroy a happy family. Really? Then why has he been sneaking around? If his marriage was so bad, why didn't he just get divorced before starting a relationship with you? Jennifer didn't have an answer for that, which told me everything I needed to know. David had been feeding her the same lies that cheating spouses always tell their lovers, that their marriage was over in all but name, that they were staying together for the children, that their spouse didn't understand them. Standard manipulation tactics designed to make the affair partner feel justified in their actions. I want you out of the house by Sunday, I said. Take whatever clothes and personal items you need, but don't remove any furniture or valuables. Everything else will be sorted out through the lawyers. Where am I supposed to go? That's not my problem anymore. You've had 8 months to plan for this possibility. You should have thought about the consequences before you decided to cheat. Jennifer stood up slowly, moving like an old woman. Jake, I know you hate me right now, but someday you'll understand that I never meant to hurt you. I just wanted to feel alive again. The road to destruction is paved with good intentions, Jennifer. You wanted to feel alive, and instead, you destroyed 2 marriages and betrayed the people who loved you most. I hope it was worth it. She left the kitchen without another word, and I heard her footsteps on the stairs as she went up to pack. I stood there for a long time, listening to her move around in our bedroom, opening drawers and closets, gathering the pieces of the life she'd chosen to abandon. An hour later, she came back downstairs with 2 suitcases and her laptop bag. She paused in the kitchen doorway, looking like she wanted to say something else, but I kept my attention focused on the dishes I was washing. I'll come back for more things later, she said. Call first. I don't want any surprise visits. Jake, Goodbye, Jennifer. After she left, the house felt different. Not empty, exactly, but cleaner. Like a fever had finally broken, and the air was clear again. I finished cleaning the kitchen, poured myself a glass of wine, and called Carol to let her know that Jennifer was officially out of the house. "How do you feel?" Carol asked. "Relieved, mostly, and tired. It's exhausting being angry all the time." "I know what you mean. I confronted David this afternoon." "How did that go?" "About as well as you'd expect. He denied everything at first, then tried to blame me for not being supportive enough, then finally admitted to the affair but claimed it was over." "Is it over?" "I don't think so. He was supposed to be home for dinner tonight, but he called an hour ago to say he had to work late. On a Friday night. Right after I confronted him about cheating." "I'm sorry, Carol." "Don't be. I'm done being sorry. Tomorrow we're going to start phase 2 of our plan." "What's phase 2? "Public accountability. David and Jennifer want to act like their affair exists in a vacuum, like it only affects them. Time to show them how wrong they are." After I hung up with Carol, I sat in my quiet house and thought about the man I was becoming. 3 days ago, I would have been devastated by Jennifer's departure. Tonight, I felt like I could finally breathe again. The old Jake would have tried to save his marriage, would have begged Jennifer to stay and work things out. The new Jake understood that some betrayals were unforgivable, and that sometimes the only way to win was to stop playing a rigged game. Jennifer and David were about to learn that lesson the hard way. Saturday morning brought an unexpected visitor. I was drinking coffee on my front porch, enjoying the first peaceful morning I'd had in a week, when David's pickup truck pulled into my driveway. He sat behind the wheel for a full minute before getting out, and I could see him rehearsing what he was going to say. "Jake," he called as he approached the porch. "We need to talk." "No, we don't." "Come on, man. We've been friends for 10 years. This doesn't have to destroy everything." I set down my coffee cup and studied my former brother-in-law. David was a big man, 6'2", and solid from years of physical labor, with the kind of easy charm that made people like him instantly. Looking at him now, I wondered how I'd never noticed the calculating intelligence behind his friendly facade. "Friends don't have affairs with each other's wives," I said. "It wasn't planned, Jake. It just happened. Jennifer and I, we were both going through rough patches in our marriages, and we found comfort in each other." "Is that the story you're sticking with?" David climbed the porch steps without invitation and leaned against the railing. "It's not a story. It's the truth. Look, I know you're hurt, and you have every right to be angry. But this doesn't have to turn into some big dramatic thing that tears both families apart. Both families are already torn apart. You and Jennifer made sure of that when you started your relationship 8 months ago." "Carol told you it was 8 months?" "Jennifer told me it was 8 months. Were you planning to lie about the timeline too?" David shifted uncomfortably. "The point is, it's over now. Jennifer and I talked last night, and we agreed that we made a mistake. We're both going to focus on fixing our marriages." I laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "David, I filed for divorce 3 days ago. There's no marriage left to fix." "You filed for divorce? Already? What did you expect? That I'd pretend not to know about your affair? That I'd welcome you back to family dinners and act like nothing happened? I expected you to be reasonable. People make mistakes, Jake. That doesn't mean their entire lives should be ruined because of it." "You're right," I said, standing up. "People do make mistakes. But what you and Jennifer did wasn't a mistake. It was a series of deliberate choices made over 8 months. You chose to pursue a married woman. You chose to lie to your wife and children. You chose to use family gatherings and social events as opportunities to plan your secret meetings. Those weren't mistakes, David. That was a calculated betrayal of everyone who trusted you. So what? You're going to destroy my marriage out of spite?" "I'm not destroying anything. I told Carol the truth about what her husband was doing. What she chooses to do with that information is up to her." David's friendly mask slipped, and I saw a flash of the real man underneath. Someone used to getting his way, someone who didn't like being held accountable for his actions. "You know Carol's always been jealous and paranoid," he said. "She's going to blow this way out of proportion." "Paranoid? David, you were having an affair. Her suspicions were completely justified. It was just a temporary thing, a midlife crisis maybe. It would have burned itself out if everyone had just minded their own business. It stopped being my business when you decided to involve my wife, and it stopped being temporary when you started spending money on gifts and trips. David straightened up, his posture becoming more aggressive. What exactly are you trying to accomplish here, Jake? You want revenge? You want to make me suffer? Fine, you've made your point, but don't pretend this is about justice or doing the right thing. This is about your ego. Maybe it is, I admitted. Maybe I do want you to suffer the way you made me suffer. Maybe I think people who betray their families should face consequences for their actions. Is that such a terrible thing? It is when you're trying to destroy innocent people to get back at me. Carol doesn't deserve this. My daughters don't deserve this. You should have thought about that before you started cheating on their mother. David stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him calculating his next move. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet and dangerous. You know, Jake, you're not as smart as you think you are. You want to play hardball? Fine. But remember that I know things about you too. Things that might interest your employer, or the IRS, or maybe some of your clients. The threat was vague but unmistakable. David was suggesting that he had information that could damage my career or get me in legal trouble. The problem was, I couldn't think of anything I'd done that would warrant that kind of concern. I'd always been scrupulously honest in my professional dealings, and my personal life was boring enough to put most people to sleep. What kind of things? I asked. Let's just say that accountants who help their clients find creative ways to minimize their tax obligations sometimes cross lines they shouldn't cross. Are you accusing me of helping clients commit tax fraud? I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm just saying that if someone wanted to make your life difficult, they could probably find ways to do it, especially if that someone knew where to look. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. David was threatening to make false accusations against me, to try to destroy my career and reputation in retaliation for exposing his affair. It was exactly the kind of move I should have expected from someone who'd spent 8 months lying to his family. Get off my property, I said quietly. Jake, I'm trying to be reasonable here. We can all walk away from this situation without anyone getting hurt. You get your divorce, I'll work things out with Carol, and we all move on with our lives. But if you keep pushing this, if you try to turn our personal problems into some kind of public scandal, then I'll have to protect myself. By lying about me to my employer? By telling the truth about some of the questionable advice you've given to certain clients over the years? The threat was more specific now, and I realized that David must have overheard conversations between Carol and me about work-related stress I'd been dealing with. There had been a few clients whose tax situations had required aggressive but legal strategies, and David might have misunderstood or misremembered those discussions. You're bluffing, I said. Maybe I am. Do you want to find out? I looked at David, really looked at him, and saw a man who was desperate and dangerous. He was facing the collapse of his marriage, potential professional consequences, and social humiliation, and he was willing to do whatever it took to protect himself. That made him unpredictable and potentially vindictive, but it also made him vulnerable. David, I said, I want you to listen very carefully. If you make any false accusations against me, if you contact my employer or my clients with lies about my professional conduct, I will make sure that your supervisors at the county know exactly what kind of man they have working for them. I have photographs of you and Jennifer together. I have credit card records showing that you used county time to conduct personal business. I have phone records showing dozens of calls between you and my wife during work hours. Do you really want to escalate this into a war? David's face flushed red, but he didn't back down. You think you're the only one who can gather evidence? You think I don't know how to protect myself? I think you're a man who's been caught cheating and is now trying to threaten his way out of facing consequences. And I think you're underestimating how much damage I can do to your life if you force me to." We stared at each other for a long moment, two men who'd once been friends now sizing each other up as enemies. Finally, David turned and walked back to his truck. "This isn't over," he called as he got behind the wheel. "Yes, it is," I replied. "You just don't know it yet." After David left, I sat back down on my porch and tried to process what had just happened. The conversation had revealed several important things. First, David was more worried about the consequences of his affair than he was letting on, which meant he had more to lose than I'd realized. Second, he was willing to make false accusations against me to protect himself, which meant I needed to be prepared for that possibility. Third, he was still thinking like a man who could control the situation, which meant he didn't understand how much evidence Carol and I had already gathered. I called Margaret Harrison's office and left a message about David's threats. Then I called Carol to let her know what had happened. "He threatened you?" Carol's voice was tight with anger. "That son of a—" She caught herself. "Sorry, I'm just so angry I can't see straight." "What did you tell him when you confronted him yesterday?" "Everything. I showed him the credit card statements, the phone records, the pictures you took. I wanted him to know that his secret was out and that I wasn't going to pretend not to know what he'd been doing." "How did he react?" "He tried to deny it at first, then he got angry and started yelling about how I was always suspicious and paranoid. Then he tried to make it my fault, saying I'd been cold and distant and that he felt unappreciated. Finally, he admitted to the affair but claimed it was over and that it didn't mean anything." "Do you believe him that it's over?" "No. And after what he just tried to do to you, I don't care if it's over or not. David has shown me exactly what kind of man he is, and I don't want to be married to that person." "What's your next move?" "I'm filing for divorce on Monday. And Jake?" "I've decided to go ahead with the plan to expose them publicly. If David wants to play dirty, then he's going to learn that two can play that game." After I hung up with Carol, I spent the rest of the day thinking about the situation I'd found myself in. A week ago, I'd been a quiet accountant with a stable marriage and a peaceful life. Now I was involved in a complex web of divorce, revenge, and potential professional sabotage. The old Jake would have been overwhelmed by the situation, would have looked for ways to minimize conflict and find compromise solutions. But the old Jake had been naive about human nature, had believed that reasonable people could work through their problems with honest communication and good intentions. The new Jake understood that some people weren't reasonable, and that sometimes the only way to deal with a bully was to hit back harder than they hit you. David had made a serious mistake when he'd threatened me. He'd escalated the situation from a personal matter to a professional one, and he'd given me justification for taking actions I might not have considered otherwise. If David wanted a war, he was going to get one, but he wasn't going to win it. The final confrontation came 2 weeks later, in a place none of us had expected, the county courthouse, where Carol and I had gone to file some additional paperwork for our respective divorce proceedings. We were walking down the hallway toward the clerk's office when we saw David and Jennifer coming from the opposite direction, clearly there for the same reason. For a moment, all four of us stopped walking, creating an awkward tableau in the middle of the busy hallway. David looked like he hadn't slept in days, his usually neat appearance disheveled and his face drawn with stress. Jennifer appeared to be holding up better, but I could see the strain around her eyes and the way she held herself with defensive tension. "Jake," Jennifer said, her voice carefully neutral. "Carol." "Jennifer," I replied. "David." The formality was absurd, given our shared history, but it felt safer than attempting normal conversation. We were no longer family or friends. We were adversaries in a legal proceeding, and everyone present understood that dynamic. "I suppose you're here to file more papers," David said, his tone carrying an edge of bitterness. "Just handling some routine paperwork," Carol replied smoothly. "How about you? Finally making your relationship official?" David's jaw tightened. We're here on legal business, just like you. Actually, Jennifer said, speaking directly to me for the first time, we're here because David's lawyer advised us to file a joint response to some of the allegations that have been made. What kind of allegations? I asked, though I had a good idea what she meant. The accusations you and Carol made to our employers, David said. The attempt to damage our professional reputations over a personal matter. Carol and I had indeed followed through on our plan to report the affair to David and Jennifer's supervisors. The county highway department had opened an investigation into David's use of work time for personal business, and the library board had questioned Jennifer about her relationship with a married man and whether it reflected poorly on the institution's values. We didn't make accusations, Carol said. We reported facts. There's a difference. You reported a private matter that had nothing to do with our jobs, Jennifer shot back. You tried to destroy our careers out of spite. Your affair stopped being a private matter when you started using marital assets to fund it, I said. And it stopped being irrelevant to your jobs when you started conducting it during work hours. That's not true, David protested. We never... David, Carol interrupted. I have phone records showing 47 calls between you and Jennifer during work hours over the past 8 months. I have credit card receipts showing that you met for lunch during times when you were supposed to be supervising road crews. I have testimony from Jake's neighbor who saw Jennifer's car at the motel on a Tuesday afternoon when she was supposed to be working at the library. You've been stalking us, Jennifer accused. We've been documenting your behavior, I corrected. There's a difference. The conversation was drawing attention from other people in the courthouse, and I could see a security guard starting to move in our direction. This wasn't the place for a confrontation, and I was about to suggest we all go our separate ways when David made a decision that surprised everyone. Fine, he said loudly enough for several nearby people to hear. You want to air our dirty laundry in public? Let's do it. Yes, Jennifer and I had an affair. Yes, we made mistakes. But we're in love and we're going to be together, and there's nothing you can do to stop that. The hallway went quiet as people turned to stare at us. Jennifer's face went pale, and I realized that David had just made a public declaration that she hadn't been expecting or wanting. David, Jennifer said quietly, this isn't the place. No, I'm tired of sneaking around and apologizing for how we feel, David continued. Jake, Carol, you want to punish us? Fine. You want to cost us our jobs? Fine. You want to make us social pariahs? Fine. But you can't make us stop loving each other. Carol stepped forward, her voice completely calm. David, you have 2 teenage daughters at home who are going to have to live with the consequences of your choices. You have a wife who supported you for 15 years while you built your career. You have a family who trusted you and believed in you. And you're willing to throw all of that away for an affair that started because you were bored and wanted some excitement. I'm willing to throw it away for love, David replied, something you wouldn't understand. The slap came so fast that I almost missed it. Carol's hand connected with David's face with a sharp crack that echoed through the hallway. David staggered back, more from shock than from the force of the blow, his hand rising to his reddened cheek. That's for 15 years of marriage, Carol said, her voice shaking with emotion. That's for every family dinner where you sat at my table and lied to my face. That's for every night you came home late and told me you were working overtime. That's for making me doubt my own instincts when I suspected something was wrong. Security was definitely moving toward us now, and I knew we had only seconds before this situation escalated beyond our control. We need to leave, I said, taking Carol's arm. Now. Wait, Jennifer said, stepping toward me. Jake, I need you to know that I never wanted it to happen this way. I never wanted to hurt you. I looked at my wife, my soon-to-be ex-wife, and felt a strange combination of pity and disgust. Jennifer, you made your choice. You chose David over our marriage, excitement over stability, lies over honesty. I hope you're happy with what you've chosen, because it's cost you everything else. I know, she said quietly. I know what I've lost. But Jake, I can't help how I feel." "Yes, you can," I replied. "Feelings are just feelings. Actions are choices. You chose to act on your feelings instead of honoring your commitments. You chose to betray the people who loved you instead of working on your problems honestly. You chose to lie and sneak around instead of being brave enough to end your marriage before starting a new relationship. It wasn't that simple. It was exactly that simple. You wanted to have your cake and eat it too. You wanted the security of marriage and the excitement of an affair. You wanted to keep your comfortable life while exploring something new. Well, now you get to find out what it's like to have neither." The security guard reached us just as I finished speaking. "Folks, I'm going to have to ask you to either take this conversation outside or end it entirely." "We're leaving," I said. "Carol?" My sister nodded, still staring at David with undisguised contempt. "I'll see you in court," she told him. "Both of you." As Carol and I walked away, I heard Jennifer say something to David in a low, urgent voice, but I didn't look back. Whatever they were discussing, whether it was damage control for David's public outburst or second thoughts about their relationship, it was no longer my concern. "How do you feel?" Carol asked as we reached the parking lot. "Tired," I said honestly. "And relieved. I think that was the conversation we needed to have." David looked surprised when I slapped him. David's been surprised by a lot of things lately. I don't think he expected there to be real consequences for his actions. Well, he's getting an education now. We stood by our cars for a moment, both of us processing what had just happened. The public confrontation had been dramatic and painful, but it had also been clarifying. David and Jennifer were committed to their relationship, which meant there was no possibility of reconciliation or compromise. Carol and I were committed to holding them accountable for their actions, which meant the legal and professional consequences would continue. "What happens now?" Carol asked. "Now we finish what we started. We get our divorces, we rebuild our lives, and we let David and Jennifer deal with the consequences of their choices. Do you think they'll be happy together?" I considered the question seriously. "I think they'll be happy for a while. The excitement of forbidden love, the thrill of choosing each other over everyone else, the satisfaction of getting what they wanted. But eventually, reality will set in. They'll realize that a relationship built on betrayal and lies isn't a solid foundation for a life together. They'll start to wonder if someone who would cheat with them might also cheat on them. They'll face the social consequences of their actions, the professional fallout, the damage to their relationships with their children and extended families. And then they'll either work through those problems together, or they'll realize that what they thought was love was actually just the excitement of doing something forbidden. Either way, it won't be our problem anymore." Carol nodded, looking more at peace than I'd seen her since this whole situation began. "I can live with that. So can I." As I drove home from the courthouse, I reflected on the man I'd become over the past few weeks. The old Jake would have been devastated by the public scene, would have been embarrassed by the attention and worried about what people would think. The new Jake understood that sometimes public accountability was the only way to ensure that actions had consequences. David and Jennifer had wanted to conduct their affair in secret, to enjoy the benefits of their forbidden relationship without facing the social and professional costs. By forcing their relationship into the open, Carol and I had ensured that they would have to own their choices completely. That felt like justice to me. Not revenge, exactly, but a restoration of balance. They had taken something from us, our trust, our security, our faith in the people we loved. In return, we had taken something from them, their ability to control the narrative, to minimize the consequences, to have their cake and eat it too. It was a fair trade, and I was finally ready to move on with my life. 3 months later, my divorce from Jennifer was finalized. Carol's divorce from David took a bit longer due to complications involving custody and child support, but it was eventually settled as well. David did face some professional consequences. He was demoted and transferred to a different department, but he kept his job. Jennifer resigned from the library rather than face a formal disciplinary hearing. They moved in together shortly after both divorces were final, renting a small apartment across town. I heard through mutual acquaintances that they seemed happy, at least initially. Whether that happiness would last was anyone's guess, but it was no longer my concern. I kept the house, bought out Jennifer's share with money from my retirement account, and settled into a new routine. The quiet that had once felt lonely now felt peaceful. The solitude that had once seemed empty now felt full of possibilities. I never remarried, but I dated occasionally and maintained friendships with people who valued honesty and loyalty. Carol eventually started a new relationship with a man who appreciated her strength and intelligence. Her daughters adjusted to the divorce better than anyone had expected, perhaps because they were old enough to understand that their father's choices had made the situation inevitable. Looking back on that period of my life, I don't regret the choices I made. David and Jennifer had betrayed not just their spouses, but the fundamental principles that make families and communities work: trust, honesty, commitment, and respect for others. By holding them accountable for their actions, Carol and I had defended those principles and ensured that betrayal came with a cost. Some people might call what we did revenge, and maybe they're right. But sometimes revenge and justice are the same thing, and sometimes the only way to protect yourself from people who would take advantage of your trust is to make sure they understand that actions have consequences. David and Jennifer learned that lesson the hard way. I hope it served them well in whatever life they built together. As for me, I learned that I was stronger than I'd thought, more resilient than I'd imagined, and capable of starting over when starting over was the only option that preserved my dignity and self-respect. That knowledge was worth more than any marriage built on lies, and it gave me a foundation for the rest of my life that no one could take away. The story was over. The new chapter had begun. The new